We are all broader notes.
Well, thanks for asking on that. Thanks for,
Okay, folks, can we gather back? Mr. Cross, please.
You're not off the commission yet.
what happens?
Power and goes to it.
I know.
So much power. Now you can take it. Now already.
What?
You did already.
We were off.
One last thing I'll say. Someone wishes I hadn't. Okay. Thank you. And commissioners are back. I see Commissioner Adams. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. We are at item 10.3, the Oregon Opportunity Grant Preview. And it is going to start us out.
Yes, I am. So thank you, Chair Rowe. This is a complicated topic that you began to hear about earlier today in public testimony and then briefly in connection with Kyle's report. So I, rather than going through, I will refer to several of these slides, but I'm going to really try to give you the start with the big picture and then express what I think the commission should understand and provide some feedback to us on related to the upcoming Oregon Opportunity Grant cycle. And just to start at the very highest level, the Oregon Opportunity Grant, as you know, is the state's largest direct financial aid investment. Grant aid to students. It benefits students attending community colleges, public universities, and private, qualifying private, independent colleges and universities. It is focused on the state's lowest income students by law. It is administered by the HECC, and the budget for that program this year is about $308 billion for this biennium. And that represents a pretty significant increase over the prior biennium, the 21-23 biennium. Our Office of Student Access and Completion administers this program and has quite a bit of authority under the law to establish who gets the funding. So consistent with the principles in the law that require a focus on students and some other requirements that are in the law, there's quite a bit of authority for the commission and commission staff to determine the sort of eligibility criteria and the award amounts and the process by which and the deadlines by which people receive funding from the Oregon Opportunity Grant. The other kind of important contextual thing to know about this program is that it doesn't require a separate application. So students don't apply to HECC. They may not even know that the HECC exists in order to get an opportunity grant. It is one of the actually beautiful features of this program that the application for the opportunity grant is their federal application for student aid, the FAFSA. And simply by doing a FAFSA, if they are an Oregon resident student, they have indicated they may attend an Oregon college or qualify an Oregon college or university, we receive a copy of that FAFSA and we use that to generate their award if eligible. And they receive that award not directly from us, but as part of a financial aid package that their college or university, once they actually attend, presents to them. But it's part of that, and it has become, for many low-income students, it's become a very significant part of that financial aid package, especially as the state has invested more in the program and we've been able to create larger awards. So I mentioned that the commission and its staff have a lot of authority. The law is not highly prescriptive about how we determine eligibility or what the award sizes are or how long through the financial aid filing season we go in awarding those dollars. And that flexibility is important because it's part of how we manage the budget that we receive. So when we mentioned our roughly $308 million budget for the program, we have 2 years to spend that. And we make determinations every year based on the budget or in odd numbers of years, our expectation for the budget. I'm going to ask about that because that gets really complicated. But based on the budget, we make determinations annually about award size, sort of award tiers, depending on student need, award deadlines, and we make adjustments sometimes, even during the awarding process, because we say, oh my gosh, this is a year where fewer students seem to be applying for awards, so we can, instead of, in effect, cutting students off on August 15th and no longer awarding students who get their pass in after August 15th, this year we can go all the way to September 15th or August 30th, right? So we make those, we could, and if there are certain cycles where we've actually adjusted award amounts up or down a bit in order to sort of manage the budget. All of this is to say is that we are now, February 2024, we are in the process, as we are every year about this time, of determining the way in which we will make this award next year, to whom, in what amounts, based on what factors, over what period of time as these applications come in. That's all normal. This sort of conversation about what will the award table that we publish that gives students and institutions an idea of what those award amounts would be. Not if we were always doing that in this time of year. However, this year it is complicated, and it is complicated by one primary fact, which is that the federal government, as part of the FAFSA Simplification Act that passed in Congress a couple of years ago, is transitioning not only to a new FAFSA, which is important, hopefully when they get it fully working, it will be simpler and more accessible for students. Separate conversation about that aspect of the transition. Even for our purposes today, even more importantly, they are changing the formula by which student need is assessed. Okay? So the old formula, which formulas take into account things like the family income for a dependent student, or the student's income for an independent student, the number of people in the family, perhaps, or people attending college or university. I'm not going to get into the details of the formula. The point is, it takes all these factors and it computes a level, it estimates the student's need. And you can basically rank every student based on the number. The old number that has been produced in every prior year is called the expected family contribution. That's what we're using this year for this year's students. We're making awards based on the student's expected family contribution. The lower their expected family contribution, as low as 0, based on the current formula. It can be as high as $1 million for a very affluent family. Based on that expected family contribution, we have an award table that tells them what they're awarded. All this is current and long-standing practice. They're changing the formula and they're changing the index. So it's no longer called expected family contribution. For students who are completing FAFSAs now for the fall of 2024 enrollment, it will be called a student aid index. It is similar to the FAFSA, it's to the expected family contribution in the sense that it computes a number, and the lower the number, the greater the estimated need of the student. The higher the number, the less the estimated need of the student. But it's based on a different formula. So students present themselves, they present their information, and they get a different number. Their EFC is almost, their new SAI, I'll use that term, formula, and I'm not going to get into details. There is some information in the slides about what is affecting or the way that the formula is affecting or factors that are being considered differently in the formula. But the important thing for this conversation, for our purposes, is that the effect of this change is a change in the distribution of student need as estimated by the federal government. And I think the simplest way to, and I'll tell you what the implications are of that in a couple of minutes. The simplest way to look at that is on page or slide number 7. I've skipped over a lot here, and I may come back to some of it in slides 1 through 6, but I really do want to focus you on slide number 7. Because on the right-hand side of this slide, you see the proportion of students, the number of students, and proportion of students who we project having the lowest sort of tier of student aid index, negative 1,500 to 0. So the lowest possible student aid index value is negative 1,500. The lowest possible EFC was 0. I think in the view of the federal government, these 0 EFC students, or now negative 1,500 to 0 SAI students, should be understood pretty much the same way as very high need students. These are students in poverty, and actually the new SAI is determined based on factors that come more closely resemble poverty definitions of the federal government. That's one of the ways that they've attempted to simplify the formula and make it more accurate. So what you see on the right-hand chart is this sort of clustering. This is to be clear, what we're looking at here, the 63,000 students and 63,093 students you see on the left-hand and the right-hand side of this chart. This is a cohort. This is the cohort of applicants of FAFSAs we received for the current academic year, actual FAFSAs. And on the left-hand side, it's their actual expected family contribution for 23-24. But then, based on information and tools that we received in early December, we are able to project, if we had exactly the same applicants presenting themselves in the same way, with the same financial data about their families, their incomes, etc., they would stack up the way you see on the right-hand side, with 74% of them, 74.3%, having a negative SAI or 0, being understood as high poverty students. The reason that's, and whereas on the left-hand side, see that 0, EFC is 56.3%. The tiers here, on the left hand, it's 0, then 1 to 2,000, 2001 to 4,000. Those tiers are our current basis for establishing their opportunity grant award amount. So $0 EFC students today, those 35,512 applicants, were eligible for the highest possible opportunity grant. And then from 1 to 2,000, it's discounted, it's a lower, slightly lower grant, and so on as you go all the way up to 8,000 EFC today. So we're using, on the right-hand side, we're showing the projected distribution of those same students under an SAI using basically the same categories or groupings, negative 1,500 to 0, so all those 0 and lower, 1 to 2,000, 2004, and so on. And again, what you see on the right-hand side is this clustering of students, even though their need hasn't changed, they're expressing the same need in this hypothetical scenario. You see this clustering of students in the lowest, the highest need category, and you see that some of these students, turns out under an SAI model, 8.2% of them, or about 5,000, actually end up with SAIs higher than 8,000. And even if we were to keep these and continue awarding grants all the way to 8,000 SAI, they appear like they would not qualify. I think it raises questions about why that is. One of the notes on the right-hand side of this is that it appears that those students who would actually go up to above 8,000 SAI are dependent students with their own income, and the new formula takes that into account differently than the old formula. So it's this category. There are other wrinkles. There's how family farms are treated. There are just other changes in the way the feds are calculating the formula, but it creates this distribution. So let me just say one other thing about explain why this matters so much. If we were to award the same sized award as we do today to the lowest income or the highest need students under SAI, we would be spending much more in opportunity grants on those negative SAI to 0 students because there are many more of them, right? And that has the potential to create a budget challenge for us in running the program. This year, the current year, the first year of the biennium, we expect to spend, as we had intended, about half of the 2-year appropriation, right? So we have about half of it left for the second year. We don't have more in the second year. we have about the same amount in the second year of the biennium. And under a model where we just continue the current practice and we say, you know, the largest awards to negative 1,500 is 0, the next largest to 1 to 2,000, the third largest, and we continue that practice, we would not have enough money in our budget to fund students all the way up to 8,000 SAI. Before I explain sort of what our thinking is about how to approach that, let me point out that this table is incomplete in a couple of ways, or inaccurate. You know, it could be potentially, it's incomplete, I think would be the right way to put it. One of them is that you may have read in the news, one of the challenges or errors, I think it is acknowledged, that the U.S. Department of Education made in this conversion, and it's reflected in this modeling, is that they didn't actually take into account of inflation, general inflation, that has occurred in the U.S. over the last several years. And so they are in the process now of updating projection tools like this that will take into account inflation when it assesses student need, because let's be clear, $40,000 of annual income in 2024 is worth quite a bit less than $40,000 of annual income in 2020 because of inflation. So once you take that into account, it actually will shift these numbers yet again, and likely, again, we're doing a lot of surmising here, but likely put more students into this 8,000 and below SAI category. It seems likely it will shift everybody's SAI lower once you take inflation into account, but we have not seen that data now. The other thing these numbers don't reflect is the possibility that there are students who aren't on the left-hand side. They're not in the 63,093 student cohort. They applied, they submitted passes this year. They didn't have an EFC of below 8,000. So we didn't include them in this count. Maybe they had an EFC of 10,000, but they will have an SAI that could be as low as negative 1,500. Again, there appears to be a lot of downward shift from EFC to SAI. We believe this to be probably a more accurate assessment of actual student need. And so there are some students missing from this count for both of those two reasons. Okay, so I think I've explained like the sort of parameters or what's contributing to the situation we're in. We have been working, Juan and this team have been working with our advisory, which includes financial aid directors, other folks in the financial aid community, other institutional representatives, to consider how should we award students this year, given these parameters. We have not made a final decision. We have not published an awarding table. And in fact, we haven't, should have said this before, we haven't received any actual FAFSA data yet. So that's why you're looking at this sort of model that uses this year's applicants, not the current applicants, because we haven't received a single FAFSA yet, and we won't until at least mid or late March. So we are using tools like this and doing our best with the financial aid community to sort of project what would make sense as an awarding structure for 24, 25, given these dynamics. We expect by next week, we will have incorporated or be able to incorporate the impact of the inflation adjustment as the Fed's work that through. We also expect, as I said, by March, mid or late March, to be able to look at a first batch of actual FAFSAs, which might show, I mean, it is theoretically possible that student need characteristics will have actually changed, right? Or that enrollment characteristics will change. Frankly, unfortunately, delays in the launch of the FAFSA and snags in the FAFSA that have nothing to do with the HECC, the U.S. Department of Education, might reduce the number of FAFSA. They appear to be slowing down the national application rates. That would have an impact on how we run the program. Nevertheless, we've been trying to, working with our advisory to develop sort of a potential approach given these conditions. And our current path, but not a decision, our current path or current plan is that we would attempt to preserve the size of the award for these lowest income students, right? So our current thinking is that we would maintain or even possibly slightly increase to account for rising living costs and tuition costs, the award size, right? So we wouldn't cut awards for the lowest income, highest need students. But obviously, if that's the case, it does create this challenge of funding the other tiers, funding slightly less needy, but still needy students. And that's given that principle of continuing to support with robust awards and probably equal or growing awards for the highest need students, and the fact that under this new model that the federal government has launched, you will have more of those highest need students. Not because their characteristics have changed, but because the formula has changed. We would not have enough funding in our budget to fund students at some of these higher SAI levels. What the slides reflect is the potential for setting a cutoff at 2,000 SAI, whereas today we're funding students with ESCs of up to 8,000. That creates the concern that you've heard this morning, and we have heard, and that we share about, well, what about these other students whose SAI is higher than 2,000, and who, if they showed up in our opportunity grant this year, got a partial award, probably. They were a zero AC, I don't know, it depends on their characteristics, but that is what some have characterized as sort of a hole in the program. The only other thing I want to note, because it's another, I think, important piece of context that we don't have completely, is that the purpose of the change that the feds made of the law that was passed several years ago. One was to simplify the FAFSA. We haven't really talked about that, and not really sure whether that's the experience that students are having today, because there have been a lot of challenges in the rollout. But ultimately, it is meant to be a much simpler application. So that aside, I don't intend to talk about that. Two, it is a new formula that better expresses, in the Fed's view, better captures actual student need, right? And that's what you see in this new distribution. And third, it is meant, it's related to number two, it's meant to expand access to the Pell Grant. So this change is expected to and intended to qualify more students for the federal Pell Grant. Unlike an opportunity grant, be careful here because I'm not sure we have final understanding of the way the Pell will play out for these students. But the award methodology for the Pell Grant will continue to maintain awarding up through, depending on the final amount of the largest Pell Grant, up to somewhere in the 7,000s SAI. So students will continue to qualify for at least a partial Pell Grant all the way up through 7,000 SAI, full Pell Grants at the 0 to -50 grade. So there will be many more students next year, it would appear, who will get a full Pell Grant. And there will likely be more students who get a partial Pell Grant. And I think the sum effect of all of that is that there will be quite likely be more Pell Grant funding coming into Oregon next year. And that was part of the intent of the law that passed. That's important context because I think it could help to offset or ameliorate some of the challenge that we could experience related to students who no longer qualify for the opportunity grant if we're forced to set that cutoff as low as 2,000. We do have other options for how to control costs for the program. Right? We set the award sizes. I've indicated the kind of principle of maintaining the power of the purchasing power of the award for the lowest income students, but there are other options. We annually, every year, we are adjusting the cutoff date for awards because that's a way. I mean, if we were in a situation, and thankfully we haven't been in this situation for a very long time, but if we were in a situation where enrollment was, applications were just like through the roof unexpectedly, we were looking at the numbers in spring and going, oh my gosh, we're going to run out of funding. We would theoretically, again, I'm sure this wouldn't happen, but we would theoretically have to say, we're going to stop awarding in May. And we used to stop awarding in February, March, very early on in life. So these are the tools that we have to sort of manage the budget, but I want the commission to understand, particularly since I think we'll be increasing public attention to this, that there are, under our current plan, there is the potential that students who received an opportunity grant this year would not receive one next year. There is the equally, if not greater likelihood that students who received a partial opportunity grant this year will receive a larger opportunity grant next year. That's that, students who shift from, they're now in this very high need category, and the prior formula didn't understand them as being our highest need students. And all of those things are happening. Only other thing I'll say, really focusing on this one slide, is that you might have picked up on this earlier, but these numbers, these represent applicants, not actual awardees. So what this data hasn't incorporated is what number, just look at the green side, the left-hand side, what number of those 35,512 students with 0 EHC actually showed up at a college, because we don't pay the student effectively unless they enroll, and then we pay them based on their level, time enrollment, part-time enrollment, they get a prorated award. So what you see here is data that represents the FAFSAs, not the actual enrollment. So if you're trying to get your head around the magnitude here and go, oh wow, we're gonna go from 35,500 students who got the largest possible opportunity grant to 46,858. Well, no, not actually, because only roughly half of those students enroll in an Oregon, a qualified Oregon college or university, and ultimately receive the award. So this doesn't incorporate those what we call pickup rates. So that's where.
Thank you. It's really complicated.
Sorry.
No, but that's good. It's very understandable. I have some questions too, Commissioner Coker.
How do you get the estimated utilization rate? On, I think, slide 3, it shows that the full-time recipients of the Oregon Opportunity Grant is about 28,000, as compared to the 63,000, and then calculating the FTEs from the halftime is not a formula that's indicated there. So I was just wondering what the estimated, what the process was to calculate the students who would actually utilize that rate, as well as what would really be helpful is the median and mean grants awarded, especially given that the change in the EOC to the SSA.
Yeah, Commissioner Coker, those are good questions. And the latter, we can follow up and actually provide that data, which we do look at. It's an important part of the way that we can help make projections. In terms of the pickup, so on this slide 3, the total recipients, the actuals, these are all term 2023 data. Total recipients, 36,305. Those were actual awards that we made to actual students. Some of them were full-time, some of them were half-time. That divided by the 63,000 that you see that were in that 8,000 and below as applicants represents our what we call our pickup rate, or 57.6%. So that was, and the way we develop, the way we project, that's actual data. The way we project pickup rates going forward is by looking at past history. And there's quite a bit. We have now great data going back years. It does fluctuate. I mean, there are a lot of variables that we don't control here, but pickup rates use past data to predict it. One of the, just not to further complicate, but as one has pointed out to me, one of the things that is changing in student behavior, partly perhaps as a result of the major increases to the opportunity grant, is we're seeing quite a few more students attending full-time rather than half-time. There seems to be an increase in the likelihood that a student is enrolled full-time, especially community colleges, and that is contributes to cost, right? Because we give larger awards to full-time students. So it's that we are monitoring that using past data as well as trend data to predict future costs.
Yeah, that's super helpful, especially in getting because in the end, the total number of students matters less than the amount of credit hours that the student is taking in terms of the size of the award.
Correct.
So,
yeah.
So I want to make sure I understood you correctly. You really won't be able to decide which of the potential variations on this until you have all of the facts, right? And how do you know, since typically that can run out through the summer, at what point do you have enough data to decide who gets cut out.
Yeah, that's correct. And so this is, in prior years, it's less of an issue because the data, it has been fairly predictable, right? The formula didn't change for ESC,
Right.
and we could largely expect that the distribution of students would be similar to prior year. Waiting on getting actual FAFSA data is really important this year because the formula has changed, and what you're looking at in slide 7 is simply a projection, right? And while we don't expect the student characteristics to change very much, we're not entering a recession, don't see massive changes in enrollment. I did mention the shift from half-time to full-time. That's a potential variable. The formula is changing, and so we don't have as much confidence as we'd like in this projection tool. We really do want to see actual FAFSA data. That, once we receive our initial batch of FAFSA data in late March, we will feel like we can more accurately set the award levels and make some predictions about what that would mean for budget. But even at that point, you're right, and this is true in prior years too, we then continue, FAFSAs keep coming in every week with, new batch from the feds, another few thousand FAFSAs. And depending on, completion, FAFSA completion rates, student characteristics of the new formula, we do have and we need the flexibility to potentially make adjustments as late as summer 2024. This year, that's consistent with every college and university that, as I understand, is also in this bind of not knowing how to package financial aid to students, given the fact that, including institutional awards, to students, given the fact that they don't know what the actual SAIs are going to be like. Final, worry here is that, I don't remember, maybe I mentioned this already, but is that FAFSA completion is lagging this year pretty considerably. It didn't open until January. When it did open, there was a lot of students had a lot of trouble logging in, getting their account set up, going through the process. We're several months behind in terms of FAFSA nationally. We haven't received anything, so we're behind in that sense too. But nationally, FAFSA completion is running some.
So you could end up with a significantly smaller pool just because people decide, I'm not going to go to college, too much trouble, I can't fill out FAFSA.
Correct.
And so that would be particularly worrisome, but you would have less worry about who we have.
Yeah, it would be bad for higher ed, it would be bad for Oregon, it would be good for our budget.
That is one bad set of circumstances.
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Devlin.
thank you. A question for Ben. Still getting an echo.
We can hear you, go ahead.
Okay. In this circumstance where under the old system, 56% qualified for the maximum, and this is an a Pell Grant, and now potentially as many as 74%. How will the Pell Grant operate? Will those 74% receive what is now the maximum Pell Grant? Will the amount of Pell Grant be adjusted?
Yes.
Is enough being appropriated at the federal level to cover this many additional students?
Yeah, so great question, Commissioner Devlin. Our understanding is that students with a SAI of 0 or below will receive the maximum Pell Grant. And students with an SAI of greater than 0 will receive a Pell Grant that is their is the maximum Pell minus their SAI. So if they have an SAI of 1, they will receive a maximum Pell of roughly 70. For that hasn't actually been defined in the appropriations process, budget process in Congress. But so if maximum Pell is $7,400, they will receive a Pell Grant of $7,399. And if they have a SAI of 4,000, the maximum Pell is $7,400. They will receive a Pell of $3,400 minus 4,000.
And while the federal government has not actually approved, I believe, any budgets at this point, do they anticipate a significant increase in expenditures for the Pell Grant?
Yes, I believe they anticipate a significant increase in expenditures in the program. They do not anticipate, we do not anticipate a significant increase in the Pell itself for students. Maybe a few $100s is what I heard yesterday. Sort of consistent with recent history where it's risen a bit year over year. But overall expenditures, yes, I believe the expectation is that because of this version of the formula, the Pell Grant expenditures will
And really helpful discussion. Appreciate it greatly. Something I had not thought about. I mean, SAI calculations likely result in a larger number of students falling within a category of potential help. And that isn't reflected in this at all. This is limited to current. And so that's another variable, and I really appreciate your, and also seems to me that critical conversation or the critical decision you have to make, and I think I would agree with where you're leaning, is do you decide to reduce the level of funding and spread it across everybody who's currently receiving, or do you decide to continue the practice of providing the full Oregon Opportunity Grant, or using some model up until you run out of funds? And those are two different philosophies. I don't know where that gets discussed, but that's, I mean, I've always been an advocate of pushing money towards the people who need it most. And we don't know the extent to which the program will backfill that decision. That's challenging.
Commissioner, that is correct. I think that is the sort of fundamental kind of philosophical question that we're having to wrestle with. And as this presentation reflects, our staff direction currently is to maintain the power of the grant or the size of the grant for the lowest income students, even though that could mean having to cap the grant out at fees. And that reflects probably the majority, but not consensus opinion of our advisory institution.
I really appreciate that.
Is it possible someone who received a Oregon Opportunity Grant last year did not receive a Pell and could receive a Pell this year? So hypothetically, you could have a person who really either gains more money or doesn't lose any help, even if they don't get the Oregon Opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you said that, Chair Rowan. I think it has been sort of missing from the conversation, and partly because we just don't know without actual data this potential category of student who no longer gets an opportunity grant, but actually ends up getting a fairly, if they show up as a 2,500 SAI student, and if we end up with sticking with this SAI cap of 2,000, they don't get an opportunity grant, but they get perhaps a $5,000 Pell Grant, where they may not have under an EFC of 8,000 last year. So there are dynamics here that I think they're clearly going to affect students. They're going to affect institutions. We don't have all the information. I remain pretty confident that there will be more financial aid, public grant aid going to Oregon students next year than there was this year. And this was a great year because we had this large expansion of the opportunity grant. So I think there will be, I don't think it's a sky is falling moment. Right. I think it is a question of distribution and fairness and predictability. And that's what we're sort of wrestling with.
There's no way to know. Commissioner Coker, did you?
Yeah, I was wanting to see if we can follow up on this conversation during next meeting with a more fleshed out version of the modeling that takes into account the average grant size as well as the FTEs that are expected to be awarded per student on average, and the award based on need tier. As it is right now, this is a really good tool to say that we're going to have to look at this as a forthcoming issue, but not a great tool for estimating a fiscal.
So Commissioner, yeah, I agree with you 100% about the utility of this tool. We do, as you would expect, this is the product or a piece of a far more complicated spreadsheet or set of spreadsheets that our staff uses to actually run numbers and create models and do projections. And we would be happy to work with you or the commission to go to whatever level of detail you, the chair of the commission, thinks appropriate on this. I think that at the commission level, my hope would be that the focus is primarily on sort of the policy and the philosophy, and that the mechanics are, in part, because it's just ever changing, right? What we present to you in April will also, like this, represent a snapshot of time, that the mechanics are primarily dealt with at the staff level, but happy to work offline with you or share you as appropriate.
Absolutely, I agree. I think that I totally agree with you with the separation of the of what's done on the staff level versus the commission level. I just think that in order to affect policy in the most effective way possible, the commission needs to have a better handle on what the fiscal would be and what the impacts of different scenarios would be in order to take the best tack and benefit the most students.
Last question. Are you confident to the point made by Community College Association and others, since no one knows, are you confident that we are proceeding in the most transparent way we can and getting whatever information we have? I mean, I know it's all, whatever is there is publicly available, but are you satisfied the process is helping the colleges and universities who are in that heck of a bind? Right?
Yeah, I think there is a desire, clearly to express a desire for access to information, and we are responding to that and attempting to balance like full, here's our drive with like context and with ever changing. So for example, like we do have these fairly elaborate spreadsheets that we're in the process real time of updating to take into account the federal inflation update. And so sort of the points of time at which we present the information. But yes, I am confident that we have been and continue to share and present data as we get it, but recognize that there's, especially given how institutions are experiencing this currently and the anxiety that this creates, that there's a desire for more and to have it more quickly. And we will continue to work with institutions to sort of strike that balance. We don't want to put out information. We're careful with what we present. We don't want to put out information that's about to change radically or is inaccurate, right? And so that's the balance that we're trying to strike.
The feds are busy enough doing that.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ben, for making it understandable. Thank you, Juan, and your staff for both all of the difficulty you're having dealing with this and with our partners, and for gathering all this information to the commissioners. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Commission, Executive Director Kenneth. If I may just add a little bit, because you just heard of the dimension of the lack of information that we have from the federal government. But one of the things that we have that is so valuable here at the HECC is our staff, quality of our staff, and their ability to roll with the punches, if you will, at this challenging time, because if the institutions are anxious, we are equally, if not more anxious, because we're on the hook to make a lot of decisions. One of the things I wanted to share with you is that our very own Kara King, who is the Operations and Policy Analyst in charge of the Oregon Opportunity Grant and Policy and Calculations, was just given a special recognition by the Oregon Financial Aid Administrators in their State Association meeting last week. She was given the Unsung Hero Award for the technical support important expertise that she shares with all those institutions, day in, day out, week in, week out, despite of what's going on. Thank you.
Congratulations. Not unsung at all. So we appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, more to come. Again, thank you very much. Okay, we are going to move on to the learning series, directly to that.
Yeah,
Ben's gonna introduce that.
we're, given that we're behind time, are they online, Guthrie? Let's jump right in. You have a quick introduction to who you're meeting, and I hope they'll also introduce yourself, a little bit of background in your packets. So good to see you, Zakia. It's been a long time.
Hello, it's good to be there. Well, not there, but be here with you virtually. And good to see you all. I'm going to be quick in my introduction. I'm Zakia Smith Ellis, a former Secretary of Higher Education in New Jersey, and worked in state government there afterwards with the governor more closely, also in federal policy, but now I'm with Education Council, and my colleague Art Coleman, who is the founding partner of Education Council, joins me. He's actually an attorney. I just play one on TV sometimes, and has built his whole life and career really on civil rights law, working previously in the Clinton administration in their Department of Education in the Office of Civil Rights there. So really have been tracking this issue and are excited to talk to you all about implications of where we are in this area today.
And thanks so much for having us. I will kick off. Zakia, you've got control of the slides.
They do on their end, and if we can
Okay.
move ahead to the next one,
All
you
right,
can just let them
let's
know.
go to the next slides. So what I want to do is be very brief on the court's June 2023 students for fair admission decision that involved Harvard and UNC. There's a lot we could talk about, but I think what's most useful in this context is the practical, operational, sort of institution and system-wide bottom lines. And so I'm going to cover some element of that before I turn this back over to the Zakia to talk about it from a sort of state system vantage. But to just cut to the chase, the court in the SFA decision, and you've no doubt seen these headlines, ruled in June that institutions of higher education can't advance and consider an applicant's racial status in admissions based on the kind of evidentiary foundation that Harvard and UNC put forth. And without going into too much detail there, the court in essence said, we don't see that you've got a compelling interest, which has always been the long-standing requirement to advance any policy or practice that confers an individual benefit based on racial status. And what's notable about that ruling is the very interest Harvard and UNC advanced, which were those that had begun in Bakke in 1978, continued through the University of Michigan cases, Grutter and Gratz in 2003, and then on through the University of Texas case in Fisher in 2016. Those very interests align with that historical record. This court says not any longer. So they have literally wiped out the underpinning for which institutions may advance considerations associated with racial status. They also addressed and critiqued the particular fact-based policy design elements of both Harvard and UNC's policies tied to their perceived negative effect on applicants and the absence of an endpoint in time. I will just share with you, I'm not going to go into the details on my opinion about the opinion, but I'll just put it this way. I teach a class in enrollment management in the law, and if I were grading the Chief Justice, he would have gotten a D-. So let's just be clear on my perspective about this decision as I give you what I think are the bottom lines, and that Zakia and I try to orient you toward the perspective of recognizing the new limits, which we've got to deal with, but also thinking through what are the opportunities the decision creates. And that's been the piece of the conversation that I think has been largely missing. And so if we can go to the next slide. There are actually remarkably, in what is a pretty bad opinion, in my view, a couple of points of terrific clarity that I think set the foundation for thinking with more innovation and with more care around advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. One, just in the sort of the broader political context in which we're dealing, where there are a number of state initiatives that are very squarely focused on anti-DEI efforts. This very conservative majority, a 6-3 decision, basically said, we recognize your academic interests. You get deference on setting your mission. And in fact, we will acknowledge that the diversity goals advanced by Harvard and UNC are both worthy and commendable, even though we think they are insufficiently concrete to justify the consideration of an applicant's racial status and admission. So that is not nothing in this political context, I would argue. More fundamentally and operationally, there's a remarkable final couple of paragraphs in the opinion after the court has gone on for pages about the problems with the consideration of race in admissions. The court basically says at the end of the opinion, as I've sort of quoted here, I'm not going to read this all to you, that basically colleges and universities can consider qualities that are important to them from a mission vantage, and where applicants then step in and say, I've got a particular perspective or interest or goal tied to my racial identity and experience. Those applicants can tell that story, and institutions can and should consider those stories. And so the court took great pains to distinguish between status-based prohibitions and the permission of institutions to consider facets of a student's identity that is tied to their individual story, which puts all the pressure on holistic review as part of the admissions process. So notwithstanding the headlines and notwithstanding the reality, this court did a number on 45 years of precedent and now saying you can't consider racial status anymore. There are some kernels for avenues for advancing positive work on a diversity front. Let's go to the next slide. So in a nutshell, where we are is it's no as to status, yes as to racial experience, which can surface through interviews, through essays, through recommendations, and the like. We can go to the next slide. I also want to elevate here what the court did not address as a sort of foundation for a conversation with you all about the issues as they may be percolating for you and your member institutions. It did not address scholarships and financial aid, outreach, recruitment, or pathways, data collection, or more broadly, sort of the landscape of race-neutral strategies, which is where I think our sort of fundamental set of plays now lands in the wake of this decision. I want to be very clear, though, the fact that scholarships and financial aid, for example, is not specifically addressed in this opinion that is limited to the four corners of the admissions process doesn't mean there aren't implications here. And I think it's really important not to slice with too fine a line as we're trying to navigate this space, because we're in a moment in time, as you no doubt well know, where literally there are folks who are monitoring websites and looking for the next wave of litigation to file or initiate. And we can talk about some of those risks in the process. But if we can go into the next slide, just sort of to that end, what we would elevate as a top line of how to think about this from a broad policy and practice standpoint. I think the narrative here is really important. We need to pay attention to how we are talking about goals and objectives, as well as the underlying strategies. I've been in this space for decades. I've constantly thought that even for a period of time as we were winning the battle in the courts of law, we were losing the court of public opinion. I think this is a moment in time for leadership, not retrenchment. I think this is a moment in time to elevate and think more strategically about how we frame and articulate and advance a narrative that meets our mission-based interests. That certainly ties then to the question of what do we do on policy design? And I think in a sort of overly simplistic frame for the purposes of this presentation, this is now a question of continuing to ground policy and practice in institutional mission and relevant research, but to frame it on the trajectory of attentiveness to what the court said you can't do, but recognizing the pathways of what the court said you can do and how those practices, even from the admissions context, can be adapted in other areas. And then recognizing, frankly, a number of points that the court did not speak to on which we have significant flexibility and moral leverage under federal non-discrimination law. And of course, at the end of the day, this all comes down to risk management. And I would simply say, as someone who's constantly involved in those conversations, the question of risk management, I think, as we all know, is not a simple proposition of what's the legal risk. It's a question of legal risk. It's a question of reputational risk. It's a question of what is the mission-based risk if we don't actually advance some goals that make sense. And so it's never a let's get down to zero on legal risk, but it's be strategic and fundamentally, I think at this moment in time in particular, given the political climate, not paint an unnecessary target on our back that has the risk of not just affecting the institution or the state system, for instance, that may be elevating a particular practice, but bringing down the entire house of cards, given the relevant and somewhat depressing legal landscape. With that, Zakia, let me pass it back down to you to sort of round us out on the state front.
Sure, and if you could go to the last slide, we just wanted to share the ways that we are thinking about promoting higher education diversity and equity to the extent that that is an interest of institutions and systems and states in the wake of the decision. There are things that we know, and these are not new to, I'm sure, you all and your strategies that we've heard in this meeting and have been advancing before. But thinking about these with renewed vigor, I would say, is a way that we've been talking with folks about how they might proceed in the wake of this, especially given what Art said about the fact that the court said institutions can continue to pursue their missions, and they should. And the mission of having a diverse student body is a commendable one and a worthy one and a good one. And so I think especially in that light, thinking about how we support institutions that are serving large numbers of students of color, low-income students, marginalized groups, increasing, I just heard your conversation about the Oregon Opportunity Grant, and really encouraged by your strides there, but ways to think about financial aid. We know that's one of the key levers of entry and access for low-income students who are disproportionately students of color as well, and then aligning pathways from K-12 to post-secondary education and through the workforce in different ways. We've categorized this in 3 different ways. Again, we'll share this. I know this is open to the public, so happy to submit this to you all for your consideration, but really want to open it to questions. Before we do, though, I want to just note there's some cases, and Art alluded to these, but even as SFFA is decided, there's continued court cases that are making their way through the system. Notably, a court case out of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson High School in Virginia is probably the one that is most on people's minds, but also in West Point and in some things in the private sector. So before we go to questions, which I hope you all will help us facilitate, I would just love for Art to speak to those pieces and how we might think about those within the context of everything else you've mentioned today.
Let me just put on my sort of forecasting lens tied to both just a few weeks, frankly, of reality in the wake of the decision to talk about what I think are the 3 strands of litigation we're either facing now or will be facing in the fairly immediate future. One is simply like the next D-Day for higher education on this front is going to be the release of enrollment data, like who got admitted, who's enrolling, how did you do against last year's numbers? And we've already gotten telegraph from advocates who are saying, as soon as we see numbers are holding steady, as offensive as this is, as soon as we see numbers are holding steady or better than they were last year, we're suing because that just can't be the case. Their claim is going to be, you say you're following the law, but you're not. So I'm expecting a wave of probably mostly OCR complaint investigations that are challenging institutions on the claim that they're not following the SFFA decision to the letter. That's point 1. Point 2, to Zakia's point on the Thomas Jefferson High School, and there's some other cases like it, but it's the one that's actually percolating at the Supreme Court right now. In broad terms, it's basically just a challenge to race neutral strategies, which has been all that the conservative court has talked about for years, that if you can't use race, you've got the avenue of race neutral strategies. Well, we now have emerging claims in the K through 12 space in particular, where the claim is you say it's race neutral, but you've got some intentionality around race behind it. So we're going to challenge it, even if it's got all the trappings of a race neutral policy. That's a Pandora's box challenge. And so I think what that means, practically speaking, is we've got to be attentive to policy design and process so that we're actually hewing the line of the way the federal courts talk about developing race neutral strategies. And then the third one, already surfacing, SFFA has already filed 2 lawsuits. So those of you who are the court reading nerds will know there's a footnote 4 in the decision that says we do not render an opinion on military academies, which was an interest that the Solicitor General articulated strongly around compelling interests in support of Harvard and UNC. And so now SFFA has come and sued West Point and the Naval Academy, challenging their continuation of race. Both of those institutions are elevating sort of the military interest as distinct from the kind of compelling interest that Harvard and UNC advance. And I think that opens an affirmative door in the longer term to think strategically about how we develop and frame new compelling interests that might support race status considerations, that might even withstand this court's review or force them in an embarrassing position, frankly, to accept something or to not reject something that they would otherwise want to reject, given sort of the political alignment of the court. So those 3 strands of litigation are moving forward.
Thank
Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, as I said at the beginning, and has been said, this is the first of a learning series, and it is meant to be heavy, and we have intentionally left enough time for discussion. We have 2 of the very best experts we could possibly have if we search the world on the impact of this. So please, your questions and discussion points or things you'd like to hear more on?
Sure, well, thank you so much. It seems to me, and I can seek clarification, it seems to me that what the court did was to dismiss as meritless any consideration of the collective good that race-based admissions could produce, and focus exclusively on the individual. And just having worked in education for 40 years, we're pretty focused on the collective experience of learning side by side. And if I'm hearing you, like the court said, that doesn't have merit.
So in a broad sense, what the court is saying, great goals, go for it, higher education, but not at the cost of facing policies that will confer an individual benefit on some students based on racial status and not others. So they're basically nodding theoretically to the value proposition as they note it's a commendable goal, but saying there's not sufficient objectivity, there's not a basis for us to evaluate it and measure when are you done, when is success, what does it look like? And it's a kind of, just for me, having been in this space for so long, such a notable point, because the court pretends to follow precedent. It did not, by the way, overrule 45 years of precedent as SFFA asked it to do. It said in so many words, we're following precedent and here's the result in this case. To follow precedent in this case means you are not paying attention to 45 years of precedent. It's a very unprincipled decision in that way, in my view, hence my D- grade. So they're nodding to the DEI goals, but they're basically saying way too amorphous, unmeasurable, not a basis on which you can judge or evaluate and ultimately base a race status-based consideration.
I would also note the language that you all likely saw suggesting that, which I disagree with. And you should know my colleague Art is very, he's an attorney, obviously, and is very, therefore, I think, deferential to the institution of the courts, which I don't necessarily have that same. So having Art say what he's saying, just to give you a sense, is like, oh my goodness, the fact that he said what he said. Having said that, what they said was that admissions is a zero-sum game, and that's the part that I would disagree with strongly. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, and the idea that it is, but they said that factually it's a zero-sum game. Therefore, if you're benefiting one student, you are necessarily not benefiting someone else. And I think of that like, if you take away parking spaces for handicapped individuals, you're not going to somehow make parking more, available for everyone else. That's not going to solve whatever problem you're doing. And but the way that they are viewing this is, in my view, wrong-headed and narrow-minded and wrong-headed. But that is how they have crafted this opinion.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Perlman.
Commissioner Tokrak.
Commissioner Coker.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for bringing us this really useful analysis of the recent goings on in affirmative action in the legal sphere. My question is about the ongoing Thomas Jefferson High School case and what the implications for that could be for higher education, given the difference in jurisdictions between local school districts and higher education boards on a statewide level.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that the short answer is we don't know ultimately where the lines might be drawn, and there is no guarantee this court will take the case. I think court watchers think there are 3, possibly 4 votes to take the case, and it takes 4. No one's convinced there are 5 votes to overturn the 4th Circuit decision that sided with Fairfax County and Thomas Jefferson High School. But your question is a really important one because it reflects a broader theory and attack. And by the way, this legal strand we are talking about is part of a much broader, well-funded machine that is this anti-DEI movement afoot. And the challenge in simple terms is this: elevating what, by all measures, when you look at the actual design of the Thomas Jefferson High School policy, is neutral in every facet. And yet they're surfacing communications with board members who are concerned rightly around racial diversity, say, therefore it's race conscious. I think if this court were to take this case and side with any facet of the theory that was advanced by the plaintiff, that got actually 1 vote, it was a 2-to-1 decision in the 4th Circuit, it would open Pandora's box to the court scrutiny of literally every micro decision being made in the enrollment process, let alone anything else. I think that actually would be, in my view, the conservative argument to make to keep the court from doing that, because I can't believe this court, notwithstanding its pedigree, really wants to step into that. But I would say, simply put, not to sound too dramatic, but I'm already coming swinging against a court I revere, that I think the potential of that line of litigation, and there are 4 or 5 circuit court actions out there right now, I think that line of cases and that theory of action has the potential to make SFFA look like a footnote in history on the DEI front.
Well, that's not encouraging. Sticking with the review process for and go back to the university, you said at the top that despite all of the negatives about this, and of course it's been widely written, that there is opportunity to consider racial experience. And of course that depends on the quality of the review process at universities, wildly different from Harvard. And what, from your clients and people you come in contact with, what's your level of confidence that colleges and universities have the capacity in the short term, before this continues to settle out, to have that sophisticated a review process?
So I think it is a mixed picture. It is evolving in real time. I will tell you, Zaki and I got no sleep between June and November because all of the work among our organizational and institutional clients on this front was drinking water from a fire hose in terms of the volume and amount of attention. So I do think we're entering a phase where we can actually step back and think more thoughtfully and strategically as we wrap up this year's cycle and go in, prepare for another year's cycle. I will say I would say I'm generally impressed by the thoughtfulness that went into either amending, supplementing, or developing for the first time essay questions that would elicit the kind of information that institutions were seeking to round out this holistic review picture. I think there are some emerging technologies, some of your graduate schools, like in the business area in particular, and I think in medical schools too, are using sort of video clips as a segment of holistic review. So it's another opportunity to tell in short form a story, but get to something that's beyond the more traditional objective measures of readiness. And I think there's an area for a lot of work. What I would elevate from you, and on the point I'm 1,000% confident, given the range of our client and partner base, we are in an era where the resources for enrollment leaders are stretched to the nines. Because what in essence this court has said is go do holistic review better and more robustly. And that means more time per application and more design with intentionality around what are the things I'm actually looking for. And so you've got a lot of deflated and exhausted enrollment leaders around the country. And I think, frankly, we should be attentive to the psychology of that moment as well.
Yeah, I will just note there's a divide, certainly in the more resourced institutions and those that are less resourced and larger. So even if you're very well resourced, if you were previously getting 40,000 applications, if you are the flagship large state institution, you're going to be able to, your ability to do what we're talking about is just not the same as a small private nonprofit that is going to have a class of 1,000 students each year. It's just not the same. And so the scale of that will be interesting to see next year, as Artis alluded to, around the numbers and where things pan out with what people are trying to implement in this cycle.
Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Ellis, Mr. Coleman, thank you for presenting this topic today. It's very informative and really stimulating. You mentioned the 3 strands of litigation that are proceeding in the courts right now. I wanted to get your opinions on what future litigation we should anticipate or plan for. So not to incite fear mongering and wringing of hands, but to think strategically and, as you said, avoid putting a target on.
Yeah, so sort of in addition to those 3 stands, and as you think sort of more fundamentally, actually, let me start with this space. It is the emerging proverbial Wild West. I mean, the advocates on the other side are not just limiting their attacks already in the education space. Private foundations, nonprofits, law firms that have DEI efforts, everyone is attempting to take this decision and take it to the bank, as it were. I would say in the education space, the area where I would focus from a sort of state system vantage, frankly, would be on financial and aid and scholarship design, where I think there is some vulnerability. And this isn't about getting rid of DEI focus on financial aid if you've got that, but it is thinking through the underlying design so you're not unduly painting a target on your back, even though you might be assuming some strategic risk. I also think it's important not to overlook the pathways programs, the recruitment outreach activities that tend to get a lot more deference under federal non-discrimination law, even where there's an express racial focus because of design issues. But if there are elements of those programs where you're getting the sort of categorical benefit based on racial status to some students and not others, I would be looking at and evaluating, again, not to prejudge. And by the way, we are not giving you legal advice. I don't want to go to jail, so I need to say that. But I would be looking as robustly on refinement of those from a legal risk standpoint as I would be focusing on the kind of issues Zakia elevated on the what are we not doing that might mitigate the harm and the limitations of the decision. So we are trying to elevate a balanced, forward-looking agenda, mindful of, frankly, what we could be doing that we haven't been doing, but being sort of smart and attentive on that handful of practices. And I think the Pathways Pipeline programs and the financial aid and scholarship programs beyond just the core admissions issues are probably the ones I would identify front and center. Zakia, you may have others you identify in that context.
No, I think those are the ones that are probably next up. The financial aid is the very clear next, but not any financial aid program. I do think it's, sometimes people can over rotate. It's definitely, there are a number of financial aid programs that have continued explicit use of race in awarding that. And I think the thing that we've been mindful of is in the context of the court's decision, which was about conferring a benefit or a harm, and the context of, okay, if you give something to this person, that means someone else is not getting it. The most analogous place is probably financial aid, where somebody is getting a scholarship or award that presumably is not open to everyone unless you're giving unlimited amounts. And if you were giving unlimited amounts, you wouldn't need to ration in some way with any criteria. So that's probably the next one. And I just want to put a finer point on why that was the case.
That's very helpful. Any other questions? Anyone online? Yes.
Well, I've got a thought about our discussion earlier about direct admission. And is this an argument for moving to a direct admission framework? And if so, should we be preparing for a scenario where the best defense is a good offense? That direct admission may create a scenario where the white population has much greater access to higher education because they simply have a higher graduation rate in secondary school. And I'm thinking about the need for tracking the impact of any direct admission over time so that arguments could be made in future cases.
I would say this is one of the top things that's coming up that I'm hearing about it at the systems level when you talk about state policy and potential ways to states that have any kind of coordinated efforts. Direct admissions programs are being kind of looked at afresh and anew in light of, states that previously went a different way, like Texas, and they had their top 10% program. And so, yes, I would say, I think there's a lot of design elements of direct admissions that you could go and like any policy development, you want to make sure that you're getting completely right and analyze and think about what are the best designs. But I would say of the things that we've heard about lately, this has been bubbling to the top as something that folks are looking at afresh.
Anything else? Dr. Ellis and Mr. Coleman, thank you so very much for starting our series. This is really important to us. And Commissioner Heyman pointed out to me, I hadn't seen it on the first slide, at the bottom of that slide, or if he wrote this or who did, mission is the North Star. Law is the design parameter.
Yes.
So as we think about our strategic plan and the work of the HECC, that is also quite applicable, that our mission needs to be our North Star. So thank you. This was just extremely helpful and we really appreciate it.
Can I just say one thing, since Zakia's here, and it's been a while, and each of us, many of us had sort of a personal or professional touchstone that kept us sane in the early days of the pandemic. For me, Zakia, who was in an analogous role in New Jersey at the time, was one of my professional and personal connections who helped keep me sane, because we were both experiencing a lot of craziness, as everybody was.
Yes,
So it's wonderful to see you, Zakia. Thanks very much for being with us.
thank you.
If you did, Zakia, we thank you all.
We kept each other as sane as we could be given the time that we had.
We owe you. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, sir, for setting that up.
Yeah.
So if you have thoughts on this afterwards, or how it worked, how we can do it better with, obviously we're gonna bring back with different subjects, just shoot me an email, or Greg, please. I appreciate your attention and contribution. Okay, now we are going to item 12.1 on your agenda, the Oregon Career and Technical Education State Plan. And you have documents in your packet.
It importantly should be online.
Oh, yes. I have to go through and have my page. I apologize. I thought you were talking to someone who was on that. I am ready now that I kept everyone's waiting. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chair Rowe, Vice Chair Hammond, and members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Shelley Hodson and I'm a policy advisor in the Office of Community College and Workforce Development. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by the state's CTE or Career and Technical Education Director, Janelle Ives from the Department of Education, and one of the co-chairs of the statewide CTE Advisory Council, David Fortney. And I think we also have Melinda Shell in the audience, who is a partner of ours in this work. So we are here today to talk about the revisions to Oregon's CTE state plan. We've been working over the past many months with our local partners and all kinds of people who are interested in this process to gather their information and feedback about what they'd like to see in the revised state plan. And this plan, just for some context, serves as our strategic plan for career and technical education in our state, as well as the compliance plan that's required by the Federal Department of Education for federal funding under the Perkins Act. So with that, I would like to turn over to Janelle to present and David.
Chair Rowe, Vice Chair Hammond, Director Janelle Ives, the Director of Secondary Post-Secondary Transitions Team at the Oregon Department of Education. And I am so pleased to be able to share our strategic state plan in partnership with all the great people who have helped contribute to it. I'm going to set the stage a little bit about why CTE is so important right now. And that is, we have once in a generation opportunity with these increased investments from the federal government in green technology, in infrastructure, in advanced manufacturing, here's semiconductors. All of those large investments include workforce development and education as a part of it. And they also include the opportunity to build those career paths down into K-12, not just at a higher education level. So it's an opportunity to really build pathways for individuals. We're also looking at a really different generation than the one I'm familiar with, or that even one 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. Students who were impacted by the pandemic have a very different attitude about their life, and they're less willing to go through the paces without more of a guarantee of what's going to be happening to them. They want to know what their life is about. They want to know that the sacrifices that they're making are going to produce a result. And having a passion and a connection with a career and those opportunities is one way to hook them into making that investment in their pathway. can go on to the next slide. Yeah. The thing that I love about career technical education is that it is one of those areas that allows us to partner across the state. We have so many great systems in Oregon, and the challenge is how do we build alignment between all of those great systems that we have, and CTE is one of those opportunities. Our CTE state plan is aligned to our K-12 Every Student Success plan. It's also aligned to our WIOA state plan that's being developed now, and we've been working really hard with WIOA. We've also been working with our Workforce Talent Development Board and including essential employability skills in our CTE state plan, our STEM partners, our community members. So it is really an opportunity to align not only education, workforce development, and community together to produce this plan. I would like to now introduce you to David Fortney. He is the co-chair of our new CTE Advisory Council that was developed because of our last CTE state plan in 2020. Go ahead, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Janelle. Is everyone able to hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Well, thanks for the opportunity to provide a few comments on the Oregon's CTE state plan. I'm really excited about it and believe it articulates clear outcomes and strategies to achieve them. First, a little bit about me before I get into what excites me about the state plan. I work at Portland General Electric. I manage our workforce planning development programs. As Janelle said, I recently joined the CTE Advisory Council as a business and industries representative, and I'm honored to be a co-chair and support Janelle and the CTE leadership. As a foundational statement, I'm really passionate about CTE, and I'm keenly interested in how education and industry and workforce systems can work together to deliver on the state plan. I believe that CTE plays a critical role in helping sustain and grow our economy, and it provides the opportunities for individuals to learn and pursue meaningful careers and gain livable wages. PGE, like many businesses, rely on CTE to grow the next generation of our workforce. As a vertically integrated company, we have diverse functions and we have a broad spectrum of career paths. CTE provides the foundation to learn the skills required to gain entry into a career and succeed in progressing along a career path, many of which feed into our electric utility industries. So there's three things in the state plan that I'm particularly excited about and I want to share with you today. One, it outlines a vision for how we align education and workforce systems towards leveraging resources, building learning pathways, and optimizing career-connected learning opportunities in multiple programs of study, all connected to key sectors of our economy. Two, it is set up to meet the business demands of our economy and grow the workforce of tomorrow. As a representative of business, this is really, really important to me. The economy is not static, and the systems that support it shouldn't be either. I'm specifically excited about how we set up our learners to be successful for the future by strengthening the quality of CTE programs of study. And three, the plan centers on equity, and it builds on and leverages the diverse representation of learners that currently participate in CTE, and it starts to answer how we can further expand opportunities for diverse learners and how we align our policies, our decisions to ensure everyone in our state has the opportunity to participate and make a living in our economy. I'm excited for Janelle and the CTE leadership team to engage key stakeholders like the HECC over the next few weeks to create a shared understanding of the plan. Again, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much.
We also couldn't bring some students, but we do have now a very new youth advisory council, including both secondary and post-secondary youth, and they've created a video message for you about their experience.
Mr. Adams, did y'all hear that at all online? Could you hear it? Good.
This is very important. And I just, I really, if we're gonna highlight the high level overarching structure of this plan, I just want to remind us all that these are thousands and thousands of individual stories that make up CTE. These experiences are really transformative for individuals, but also families, community, and potentially our society and our economy. So I just want to keep that stage. These are some pictures of a pre-apprenticeship program in rural Oregon. And we have lots and lots of examples from our community colleges, our local workforce boards, our ESDs, and our high schools working together with community groups. And I hope someday we'll get to share some of those more detailed stories because it's really exciting work.
Thank you.
So as we mentioned, this is a continuation of our current state plan, and the revisions that we are bringing forth to you today and to the State Board of Education next week are really focused on what we've learned over the last 4 years and input from our partners. So with that in mind, we're carrying forward our current vision, and that vision sets a really bold goal for current technical education in our state that supports students, empowers communities, and provides a positive economy. This is our timeline, and this was provided to us by our partners at the federal level. And we've been working on this for a while, as you can see. So as we continue to work on the revisions to our current plan, we are bringing that forward so that it not only is our strategic plan, but also, again, the compliance piece that we need for our federal funding. And we have, as I said, mentioned, we've engaged with communities across the state. We did a number of virtual forums. We did an in-person roadshow in Eastern Oregon, surveys, and so we've engaged lots of folks in developing.
Talk a little bit about the benefits of CTE, and these benefits are both at the secondary and post-secondary level. At the secondary level, students have a higher attendance rate, participate and concentrate in career technical education. They're more likely to graduate. Our CTE concentrators right now are graduating at over 95%. And they're equally likely to attend college. And I hope we can change that. I think CTE is a very underutilized way to recruit students into our community colleges and colleges. And they earn higher income 6 years after high school graduation. I will say at the post-secondary level, our students also have higher attendance rates if they're in a CTE program and graduate and earn higher income. We have organized the plan around 3 big outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We will not achieve these in the next 4 years unless we're extremely lucky, but we are going to continue to work towards these big outcomes. And one is that we are really systemically integrating career technical education and career connected learning into our education and workforce development system. 10 years ago, CTE was the building out the back, program out the side. They do great things, but we're not sure exactly what they do. And it really needs to be part of, an integral part of our school improvement and our education system. We also need to increase equitable participation and access to high quality CTE and career connected learning. And this is ongoing work. It's part of our federal funding that we focus our monies on this. And we've really intentionally tried to expand who's participating and communicating that influence in our state plan. And we want to continue to do that through our advisory councils and through partnerships.
In the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these next 3 slides, but these slides detail some of the strategies that will help us work towards implementing or achieving those outcomes that Janelle just shared. And so we have the strategies into the buckets based on the outcomes, and so those are summarized here, and I'm just breaking through them and try and make sure we have some time for questions. So on to accountability.
And this is just for your information because this does serve as our federal grant application. We are held accountable to these performance metrics, and we get to set our performance targets with the federal government. So I wanted you to be aware of where we're setting our targets. And then we just we're excited to implement this plan in partnership across the state. We'll be working on it and we report out annually on progress on our plan, and we'd be happy to come and visit you anytime to give you an update on the process in our state.
And with that, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'll start us off on this. I think your plan is splendid, and you are right, obviously, that there is just no better time with all the extra funding and the attention on career and technical education. So we are all in with you on that and on the benefit of these programs. And I loved when I read through your report, the values and the way you set it up. Everything was very clear. The one thing, and I heard you loud and clear say that you're not going to be able to accomplish everything in the next 3 or 4 years. And that's certainly understandable. But near the beginning, where you're talking about 2027, Oregon will make progress on achieving the 3 overarching outcomes. To the extent you were able, as you refine this or think about it, and I'm not necessarily, to be a little more specific, I'm not necessarily looking for metrics that we're going to hit this number by this time, but even if it's make sure we're improving by, at least X%. Because the other thing you could see too in some of one of the appendices was that we really only have about a 50% rate of concentrators. And so even though you might be having to report the data that way for the federal government, because sometimes it was varying year to year by 0.1%. It's really, I think if you're more explicit about the levers you can use, because what we're talking about are people who are interested in START and having them complete or get a job. And then how many people do we get in the funnel to begin with? So those, at least on the face of it, without having the background you do, those seem to be the 2 pressure points that you could perhaps concentrate on to try to increase this, because that's what we're all interested in. You've got a good program, you've got good partners, and it's really how many people do we get in, how many people stay in, how much are we helping? So that's advice, not a question. But I commend you for all you've done.
I really appreciate that, and yes, that is, have a lot of participants, but converting them into sticking with the program, and that involves not only communication, but like systems changes in high schools around scheduling and opportunity as well. So it is, yes, definitely something to track.
Other questions or comments?
Oh, boy. You actually, Carol said the thing that I was probably going to say. It's just like, no, it's great. I like that. Same way. What are the levers that actually help us make progress on, I think, a great plan? I'm interested in hearing more about that. There might shy away from using words like best practices, but maybe there are some that we know about that we can say, yeah, we've seen this work, and it would be helpful for us to be aware of what those are. My own experience, and I have some sense of it didn't work. I also have a strong sense of ways in which culture has historically worked against this, and ways in which we are effectively working to change that. Would be interesting.
Thank you, Chair Haynes, for question. We have an opportunity to come back in April to talk more about implementation, and so we can address both floors.
Thank you, Commissioner Cover.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chair. I'd love to connect with you after about an unrelated, related to your field, but unrelated to the board fields within CTE across the state.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner, go ahead.
Yes. Somewhere in one of these documents, I've read that there's, for Oregon high school graduates, only about 33% meet the state's mathematics proficiency standards. On this page here on accountability and state determined levels of performance, one of the levels is academic proficiency in mathematics, and it puts it at 26.75%, which is a baseline, which normally a baseline would be what you're currently looking at in terms of overall levels of the parties who were in the baseline group. And then the targets are like in 2024, 19.8%. And 4 years later, 20.4%. What does this mean? Does this mean that our targets are only about 1/5 of the participants are proficient in mathematics?
Commissioner Devlin. I'll be happy to address that. The data we have for our state performance is not incredibly accurate because we have the most opt-out rate of any state in the country. So there are a lot of students who do not choose to participate in our state assessment. We are out of compliance with our federal laws. So sometimes the pool that we have of taking these tests is so small that it can fluctuate in some big ways, as well as we have the ongoing learning loss for COVID. So you're setting those targets very conservatively because not only because of the learning loss, but because of our low participation rates make it really hard to predict how many of our students will actually participate in this assessment. But it is a concern we have to share with you.
Okay. I'm still wondering, well, if the data is not necessarily accurate, how do you, one, improve the performance, and one, what would be an acceptable level? Not all CTE occupations are dependent upon a person's proficiency in mathematics, but many of them are.
I mean, the acceptable level would be, I wish everybody would be passing the state assessments in mathematics. We do and will be focusing on improving the academic support in our CTE programs. So part of our CTE programs is not just the technical and employability skills, but also academic skills. And I think students really respond to applied learning of mathematics. That is one strategy we have. Another strategy we have at the Department of Ed is to improve our participation rate by communication and support for our school districts and encouraging all students to participate in those. So I think those are two approaches. We also have a new mathematics design in K-12, our 2+1 model, which I'm sure our math specialists will be happy to talk about, which is transforming the way we teach mathematics.
Well, I know that the next report that we have is an example of a process to improve our performance, but it still would very much concern me in the long term.
Thank you, Commissioner Devlin, for raising that. Okay, thank you, Janelle, Shalee, and David. We appreciate the work you were doing and appreciate sharing this information with us. Thanks. We'll see you again in April, you say?
Yes.
See you again in April. Okay, commissioners, hang in. We've got 2 more items. Donna Llewellyn, have we crowded your time too much?
It's
community college. Okay. You're used to, if you're near the end of the agenda, you might have to speed up.
Buckle up.
Yes, ma'am. We got it.
Good afternoon, Chair Rowe, Vice Chair Newman, members of the commission. Once again, for the record, my name is Donna Llewellyn. I'm the director of the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development. I hope I am joined by my colleague Elizabeth Cox-Brand and Celeste. Are you there too? Celeste is out there too. Elizabeth is nodding her head. So we'll go ahead and get started. First slide, please. I can't see it behind me. Oh, that other slide. Sorry. We decided to trick you. So I'm going to go first.
Here we go.
You trick. Let's read them. Okay, so next slide. Thank you. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to begin by grounding us in the Commission's equity stance, particularly in the part around the intentional examination and elimination of policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that perpetuate the stark inequities in post-secondary education and workforce training we see today. Developmental education and the delivery of educational support services has been a topic of discussion for, I'm going to say, a couple of decades now in Oregon. And while many institutions are making some strides in this area, data indicates that only 23% of students starting with prerequisite developmental education math manage to attain a credential within a 6-year period. I'm sure you'll agree, we've got to do better. Our students deserve better from all of us. With the continued intentional focus on student success, momentum has increased related to data-informed, student-focused developmental education redesign. I'm going to share with you just a little bit of what is in the works. Next slide, please. In October, a small yet mighty team traveled to Denver to attend a national policy forum as part of Oregon's work related to strong start to finish and developmental education redesign. The team included Representative Ricky Ruiz, President Patty Scott from Southwestern Oregon Community College, Elizabeth, our own Kyle Thomas, OCCA's John Wyckoff, and myself. The conversation over those days, over those few days, I promise you, were student-focused and about how we could work together to finally create change. Our students who are at the heart of this conversation have waited long enough. Next slide. As part of that policy team's conversation, you may have heard earlier when Kyle mentioned things that were in the Senate Bill 1552 Omnibus Bill. Developmental education redesign is in the current bill language for this session. The bill requires HECC to convene a work group to study evidence-based co-requisite support models, and will have a cross-sectional representation of institutional participants and students. It will be on a fast timeline with a report due by December 15th to the Commission, which really means December 1st, so we can meet the HECC target deadlines. What we're intentionally trying to do through a series of intentional actions and strategies is to create an ecosystem for change. Next slide, please. In my 25 plus years of public education policy work, I found that putting the student at the heart of the work is the first step in anything that's complicated. Next, you have to have a multifaceted approach, which we are hoping to achieve by OCCA and HECC's Office of CCWD working together closely to co-host an April Math faculty meeting. This one-day event is being facilitated by a team of colleagues from Washington who have been leaders in this work. They will help lead the way as we bring educators, administrators, and advisors from Oregon's 17 community colleges to roll up their sleeves and look at course learning outcomes, assessments, and discuss the curriculum we're teaching. The work group that I just discussed a few minutes ago will dig into the evidence-based co-requisite support models and other promising practices. They'll take that information, along with anything that might come out of the April conversations, and use it to help inform the recommendations they will make to the HECC in the December report. The continued engagement between HECC, the colleges, and the legislature, I believe, will be key in the successful implementation of whatever. And finally, I can't express how important faculty engagement and transparent communication are and will continue to be. Change is hard, it can be scary. And we've all had plenty of change in the last few years. We talked about that a little bit today. So being thoughtful, bringing partners to the table to create the ecosystem necessary to implement and sustain the changes is where we continue to lead in. So now I'll turn it over to my colleagues who have even more great news to share. Elizabeth, I think that's you.
Thanks, Donna. Chair Rowe, Vice Chair Heyman, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Cox-Brand. I am the director of the Student Success Center, housed at the Oregon Community College Association. And if you would go to the next slide, please, Guthrie. So this gives you an idea of what we're talking about. What is the issue? A lot of people think that students who are in prerequisite developmental education don't succeed because they simply don't pass. They don't have the academic rigor that they can pass through the 4 or 3 levels of prerequisites to get to the college level. Well, that's not really the case. What happens, and we know this with community colleges especially, is that the more exit points that our students have, the more opportunity life has to get in the way. And so this particular slide shows you that if we have 4 levels of developmental courses that are prerequisites, by the time we get to the end of that, for the students who pass, for the students who don't have life get into the situation and derail them, it is a very small number of students who actually make it through the whole process. Next slide, please. And Guthrie, at this point, if you would please cue up the short video that we've got on co-requisites. Is there sound?
As faculty advisors and administrators, we want to see students get excited by what they learn and succeed. To graduate on time without big debts, ready for a fulfilling career. Right now, not every student has the same educational road in the first year of college, especially when it comes to taking required math courses. Completing college can be a challenge for anyone. Our system is designed so that some students are placed on a direct road. Others are required to take multiple terms of remedial prerequisites. This is before taking any college-level credit-earning courses. This creates barriers for students, particularly students of color and those from households with low incomes. No matter how hard they've been trying, and we've been trying to help, many of these students start to fall behind. The effect of this is clear. Students are less likely to stay in college with each remedial course they have to take. This is our challenge as well as theirs. There is something we can do to get more students on a direct road. We can offer co-requisite math, a just-in-time support proven to help students get through college math and earn a credential in less time. Students take college-level math while also taking a co-requisite course where they get extra support to learn and understand the curriculum. Co-requisite courses are a proven way to break down barriers for students who have been underserved by our educational system. They've already made a significant impact in other states across the country. Co-requisites help students reach their full potential with the just-in-time support they need to pass their math requirements in their first year.
The support class helped me pass math.
I felt empowered and well-informed.
It felt like a one-on-one connection with my teacher.
Let's get more students off to a strong start by implementing co-requisite math across Oregon.
Thanks, Guthrie. And you'll notice that we're focusing specifically on math. We do know that, of course, students also have prerequisite writing courses that they often take, but we are focusing mostly on math because it has proven to be the larger obstacle for many of our students in their educational trajectory. We talk about this as holistic support because there are elements to this outside of even the co-requisite model itself. And those are things such as placement. We have to have adequate, proper placement so that we know that students, when they are going to be able to be successful. We can get them into those college level courses because the research has shown that it's access to the college level course that is keeping students from completing it more than anything else. And we also have to have the correct math pathways. We have 3 courses, as you will see, that we have aligned co-requisites with, and that is Math and Society, which is more of a quantitative reasoning course, the college algebra course, which is the traditional STEM course, and then a statistics course. So it's important to get a student into the correct math course for her or his career. So this is just an overview of a few of the things that we'll be talking about here in the next few minutes. Next slide, please. So this is what the challenge is, what we're trying to continue to break down. Donna alluded to this earlier. No matter the level that the students start in a prerequisite developmental education program, if they start even one level below the college level course, only 59% of them complete that college level math course. We've had colleges that have had up to 5 levels of developmental prerequisite math courses. And you can see that for the students, the further down you go, the more levels they have, the less opportunity, the less likely they are to ever reach that college level math course. Next slide, please. And this is the slide, I believe, that Commissioner Devlin was referring to, where the information that we received from the Department of Education, this is from 2018-19. So to your point, Commissioner Devlin, in that time, only 33% of Oregon 11th graders met the state math standard. That was, of course, before COVID. And we know, as Janelle had just mentioned, that there is significant learning loss that happened during COVID. So I can only imagine what the statistic is now. Obviously, this also is a challenge. We are talking about adult learners. I myself, even though I have a PhD, I have not taken college algebra since probably 1990. And if I were to take a placement test, I would not be happy with the results. So for learners who've been out of college for a while, math is an issue. It is an obstacle for our students to be successful. And if you break this down through an equity lens and you look at students of color, students from incomes with or households with low incomes, English language learners, it's an even more dire picture. Next slide, please. So this was in the video, but it just gives you a visual representation of what we're talking about. Oop. Thank you, Guthrie. It just shows you what we are talking about. Rather than having to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop to get to the college level, the co-requisite model puts the student in the college level course and gives them the just-in-time support that they need in another support course that is right alongside them. Next slide, please. And I'm going to let Celeste talk about this a little as we get into this, but the co-requisite courses are not exactly what people often think they are. Many people have thought that co-requisites are just mainly taking the 4 levels of developmental mathematics and smashing them into one class, and that's not the case. There is much more to a co-requisite course that I'm going to let Celeste speak to than simple mathematical skill. There's a lot of study skills. There's a lot of connection and belonging that goes on between the professor and the students. The students get to know each other. And we know that when students are engaged with people at the college, they are much more likely to persist and to succeed. Next slide, please. This too is in the video, but it just lets you see what can happen when we have co-requisites at scale, which means that all new entering students have an opportunity to take a co-requisite course. And this is what we're aiming toward. Next slide. So the next slide, please. Everybody wants to know, how's it working? We currently have 9 Oregon community colleges that are implementing co-requisites. We are not yet at scale. We have been implementing them since the fall of 2021, which was a very difficult time, severe ultimate kudos to the faculty for taking this on during the pandemic. But as you can see from these statistics from the 22-23 school year, excuse me, oftentimes the students who were in the co-requisite course were succeeding at the same rate, if not higher, than students who were in just the parent level college course. On the surface, that may not seem like a big deal, but when you take into account that the students in the co-requisite course would not even be in the parent course, it's significant. Next slide, please. And this just points to it. So co-requisites are making the difference already in Oregon. So for students who would take any of the prerequisite developmental ed math courses, only 23% would ever go on to take a college level math course. But when we look at the co-requisite students who are already taking these courses in Oregon, in the Math 105 course, those co-requisite students are succeeding at a rate of 72%. So they are exceeding even our hopes in this particular model, and we're not even at scale yet. And that's exciting. The next slide, please, shows more of our outcomes. So when we take all of the outcomes and we put them together, on the left-hand side of this chart are the college-ready students. That means the students who would have, in our traditional placement, been deemed college-ready and placed into the college-level course. The right-hand side bars are those students who were the co-requisite students. In other words, the students who would not be in the college-level course. So as you can see, in some of the courses, the students in the co-requisites are exceeding the pass rate of even the students who are deemed college ready, which means they are exceeding even what we were hoping. They are doing better than even the students who are deemed that they should be in the class, which is phenomenal. The next slide, please. And these are just some of the quotes that we have collected from some of our students. And I'm going to hand it off to Celeste here in a moment, because the other point that we want to make with these co-requisites is, again, it's not just about mathematics skill. This is a lot more about helping students learn how to be students, helping students to feel like they belong, helping students to understand a growth mindset and to be able to get the grit to change the way that they are going through their educational trajectory. And I'm very pleased to introduce my friend Celeste Peterson, who is a math faculty and one of our co-rec champions. Celeste teaches co-requisites in college algebra and in math and society at Clatsop Community College. So Celeste.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So just a fine point, we no longer teach college algebra. We now teach pre-calc 1 functions as of 2023-24 school year. So we have to update ourselves here a little bit on what we've been saying. But yes, I've been teaching the 105 and the 111 co-recs since 2020 when we first started doing them in the state of Oregon. And I've seen just amazing success, more than what I was expecting. With the 111, it's been smaller groups because we had very small 111 courses, but my 105 courses have just exploded. We even had to add an extra section of it fall term for me to teach, just so that we could have enough for the students. And it's not, as Elizabeth kind of mentioned, it's not just about the math. It's not taking all of the math that had been in a prereq course and putting it into the course that's just the 1 credit and expecting students to learn all that material, but it's giving them the skills that they need to be self-learners and the skills that they need to learn how to reach out and get the help when they need it. So there's a lot of what I kind of refer to as the soft skills. It's not really the math that we're dealing with. I think sense of belonging is huge. Just this Friday, Elizabeth hasn't even heard this one yet, but this Friday, one of the students in my class said, "This class is the class that gives me the least anxiety out of every class that I'm taking at the college." And I never thought I would have said that about a math class, but I have accessibility to the instructor all the time, and I don't have to worry about asking questions, and I know what's coming. And that was just like, I want to just put it on a plaque. That's what made my day. But I also had a student who, I think this is a great example of the success of the programs. I had a student who came in, and when they entered our math program, they were not able to do 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication. And that student ended up taking my co-rec and applied for the nursing program, was able to pass the TEAS test within the first year of being at Clatsop, and was able to get into the nursing program. So I thought that's just an example how she would have not even been able to have been in that class for a full year before she had taken it with a co-rec. So I think that's a great example of how successful this can be. One more is I just talked to one of my former students and said that I was going to be talking about co-recs. And she said, tell them that I would have never gotten my degree if it wasn't for the co-rec. I would have given up. It was just too big of a math path when I looked at it. So I really do think that it's worthwhile, but I also think we have to be really careful and not just say, okay, just anybody can teach these courses, right? We need to definitely, if we're going to be instituting this, have some professional development. There's a lot to it about making sure that that belonging is happening, making sure that we're talking about the growth mindset and how to reach out, and that it's okay to ask for help, and belonging, and the type of learning we're doing too. You know, active learning is super, super important. And that's part of the reason I think that I'm seeing the success, because the students are actively engaging in the material and with each other. It's not just lecture. And that's a big piece of it we have to keep in mind as we're doing this also.
Thank you, Celeste. And that is so important. And one of the other points that we need to make sure to put a pin on is we know that this does not work for every single student. That will often be what you hear from critics. It doesn't work for everyone, and that's absolutely right. And I am the first to say that when we find something that works for 100% of the students, I will kick co-requisites to the curb in a heartbeat. But I will take 70% success over 23% any day, and twice on Sunday. So we are very excited about this work, and it's wonderful to even hear the faculty's perspective on this, and to not have students crying in class is also something that is a positive. So Donna, I'm going to turn this back to you.
And with that, I think that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions. We will provide updates, obviously, to the commission as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Simon.
Thank you, Chair Rowe, and thank you so much for your presentation. I recognize we're over time, so I'll speed through what I wanted to say. First of all, this is such good news, and thank you so much for bringing the faculty perspective and the student perspective into the report. I really appreciated hearing directly from a faculty who's involved, and nearly from the students hearing the faculty report. Thank you for that. I am interested in knowing more about what the costs for the program of implementation and assurances in training faculty and helping students understand what it is. And just to let you know, I have a background in co-requisite education in Idaho. I did it in writing, so I have taught in this model, and so I've seen firsthand how it works. But I also know that in my experience, there are costs associated with it, and I'm just interested in hearing more about challenges in expanding, plans to expand, and it doesn't have to be today. I'm talking about like in the future, and how to and what if there are other kinds of measures of success. Then the numbers are speaking very, they paint a really clear picture, but I'd be interested in longer term assessment, a whole bunch of other stuff. So I guess more conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So Chair Commissioner, that's one of the things that Elizabeth and the rest of the policy team talked about is there are going to need to probably be some resources at some point. Exactly what those are, exactly what they look like, exactly where they come from, all of those pieces are going to need to be worked out. But that's part of the work that lies ahead of the work group over the next several months.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Rowe, and thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted to ask, it seems like looking at the data, only about half of these classes in which this was implemented saw a rise in the passing rate and the retention rate of the students, and out of those, the vast majority of those were specifically in Math 105. So it seems like that's working to some extent with certain courses, but in other courses that might be lagging behind. Is that due to implementation, or is the data that has been presented so far not as consistent in terms of how the co-requisite courses are working for the higher level math courses?
Elizabeth, do you want to take a whack at that, or do you want?
Sure. And to your point, Commissioner Coker, there are not that many co-requisites in whatever it's called now, Celeste. I forget now in Common Course numbering what we've got. It's not college algebra now, but whatever Math 111 is called. There were, I think, only about 4 of the college algebra, and you'll notice on our implementers, it's many of our smallest colleges are the ones that have stepped up to be implementing this. So the N that is in those courses is also very small. And to be fair, and I could let Celeste as a math faculty speak to this much more, what was called college algebra was the one that was giving folks the greatest discomfort. There was a lot of angst around doing a co-requisite for college algebra. And that was just, it's a STEM path. It's a very hard path. People recognize that. It's a calculus path. And how could you possibly do a co-req in that pathway? But we are seeing that even now in 24-25 or 23-24, we've got some new information coming. Chemeketa has started to implement the co-req in Math 111, and they're our second largest college, which will help us with some of the numbers. But it has been a tougher road as far as getting more faculty to engage in co-requisites in Math 111. And I don't know, Celeste, if you have anything that you want to add to that.
It's been a harder path, but I think also it had the lowest pass. It had very, very low pass rates if you look at it for even our non-conrec people. So even though our pass rates aren't as stellar, if you're looking at the pass rates that are happening, they're still equitable with what was going on for the people. And those people wouldn't have even been in that class. So the fact that we can get similar pass rates for someone who wasn't even allowed to take it is what really stands out to me in terms of that part of it, that it is doable. I think it's going to take some work, but I think that we could get it up to the point where it was very successful.
That makes a lot of sense.
I really want to reinforce that point because Elizabeth made it when she presented the slide, and Celeste, you just hit on it. But there is a risk in looking at, and I think it's the slide. So I think it's the one you're referring to, Commissioner Coker, that has the currently Oregon Community College is currently implementing. You look at these rates, you say, well, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference. But you have emphasized, and I just want to really underscore, what you're comparing there are students in that co-requisite line who, without the co-requisite support, would have been placed into a developmental education course. They would not have been in that course at all. These were students who did not exhibit through the testing the proficiency to be placed typically in the college level course. So it's not an apples to apples comparison in that sense. These are students who, without the co-requisite support, would not have been in the course in the first place. And this data shows that they're passing the course at similar or greater rates to their peers who showed up, passed the test, were deemed college ready, and are in this course. So to me, it's actually very powerful data that illustrates and underscores the fact that these co-requisites are making. And I just want to say, I know we're late on time, but Elizabeth has been working on this. I was just Googling our website, Elizabeth, to confirm. You're going on 10 plus years, sort of beating the drum on the need for developmental education reform. And it is so important, and we're finally making progress, and it is in no small part due to Elizabeth's decade-long really being the sort of hub of that movement here in Oregon. So I really hope the commission will take deep consideration of this and advance these strategies in our work to show.
I had dark hair when I started this.
And so did I 10 years ago.
Yeah. But thank you for that.
Very encouraging. Thank you. Commissioner Bisco.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your amazing presentation. Commissioner Simnett, you brought up we haven't heard directly from students. I was a student that took a prerequisite class the first time it was offered for Math 105 at LPCC, and it was the first time and only time I've been able to get anything above 70 in my math test. I got a 95 and I emailed the professor and I thought she was crazy, but I legitimately got a 95. So that was a very helpful course and I'm very grateful that it is continuing in my competition numbers.
Good way to wrap up the segment. Thanks, Donna. Thank you. Okay, we are to our last item. It's 13.1, well, it's background action item on the permanent rule amendment relating to the Bachelor of Science in Nursing at community colleges.
Good afternoon again. For the record, I'm Charlie Hudson.
Yes.
And I will make this quick. So today we are giving you some proposed revisions to multiple rules under Chapter 589. These revisions support the implementation of Senate Bill 523, which in 2023 amended statute to allow community colleges to offer a Bachelor of Science nursing degree. And while we were working on the amendments to implement that law change, we found some inconsistencies in some language and made some revisions to clean some of that up, and also added information about clarity for credit requirements for these Bachelor of Applied Science degrees and Bachelor of Science nursing degrees, and added language that supports colleges who want to form consortia to work together to offer these advanced degrees. So, the comment was positive, and you have a letter in your packet from Executive President Jessica Howard that affirms that.
Thank you. Is there any evidence of consortia to do this yet?
There is a budding consortia on the Bachelor of Science nursing degree. They haven't officially applied because but after these rules pass, I do expect an application for improvement. Between 5 to 7 colleges are currently having that conversation.
Good. Please keep us updated on that if the application comes in. Appreciate that. Any questions? On a motion. Thank you, Commissioner Bisco.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Commissioner Simnett. All in favor of the rules change, permanent rules change, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? You are passed. Thank you very much for that. Exciting new program. Okay, commissioners, if there's nothing else that you have to come before the commission today,